So as we think about the definitions, I want to look a little bit at a 1950 movie called Harvey starring James Stewart. Check out this scene here.
Yes, these things always work out just the way Harvey says they will. It's very, very versatile. Did I tell you he could stop clocks?
To what purpose?
Well, you've heard the expression, his face will stop a clock. Well, Harvey can look at your clock and stop it. And you can go anywhere you like, with anyone you like, and stay as long as you like, and when you get back, not 1 minute will have ticked by.
You mean that he can...
You see, science has overcome time and space. Well, Harvey has overcome not only time and space, but any objections.
Fly specks. Fly specks. I've been spending my life among fly specks while miracles have been leaning on lampposts at 18th and Fairfax.
So what would you think if somebody told you that they had a 6-foot rabbit for a friend? We're going to use that question in order to get into some vocabulary. So these are words on our vocabulary list, and they have to do with enchantment and disenchantment, exclusive humanism, the imminent frame, and then we're going to look at 3 different uses of the word secular and see that this word is actually used in different ways. To get at this question, we're going to be looking a little bit at a book by Charles Taylor called A Secular Age and looking at some of his ideas in this book. Taylor's book asks a lot of questions, but one of the ones that he's concerned about is why was it easy to believe in God in, say, about 1500, and why is it so hard to believe in God today? And he's going to give some historical reasons for this. One of the things that Taylor's going to do is he's going to try to show how the word secular has been used differently. One way that the word secular is used is in separating. That is the difference between secular and sacred. And sometimes you see things like a farmer would be a secular job and a priest would be a sacred job. And sometimes secular is used in this way. Taylor also shows how sometimes the word secular is used as in subtracting the church from the state, where they're kept at a distance and there is no religious influence allowed into public affairs.
And so, I don't have an issue with what you do in the church. But I'm going to be up in your face if you're going to knock on my science classroom and tell me that I got to teach what you're teaching in your Sunday school, because that's when we're going to fight.
Taylor says that the best way of understanding secular is where it describes contested beliefs, not that there is no belief, but that everybody is believing in different ways. And so different religions can live in the same neighborhood, believe different things, and yet still get along with each other. Here's how Jamie Smith explains it.
To the contrary, what happens is, in a secular age, what's believable has changed, right? The plausibility structures of society have changed. So no one's belief system can be taken as axiomatic anymore, right? To live in a secular age for Taylor is to live in an age in which we realize that all beliefs are contested. But that doesn't mean that people stop believing. And in fact, they believe in all kinds of different ways. And so
the important takeaway is that Taylor's idea of secular 3 is the notion of an age of contested belief where people believe different things or nothing at all.
But is it fair to say you do believe in a universalism in the sense of that everyone will ultimately freely choose to be won over by the love of God?
I don't know. Do you?
Well,
do you? And to sort of stake a claim that that's going to happen, how would anybody know that?
I know I'm asking
what is the... Do you know?
No, I don't.
Do you know?
Well, I think...
So maybe you believe, maybe you don't believe, but the point is that the secular is where all these beliefs can merge together. Taylor's historical development is going to distinguish between enchantment and disenchantment, and that is there were some and there are some who will accept things like spiritual reality beyond the material existence. Smith's book, How Not to Be Secular, talks about these 3 different ways that Taylor says that we went from an enchanted world to a disenchanted world. The first is that the natural world was constituted as a cosmos that functioned semiotically as a sign that pointed beyond itself to what was more than nature. The second was that society itself was understood as something grounded in a higher reality. Earthly kingdoms were grounded in a heavenly kingdom. In some, people lived as an enchanted world, a world charged with presences that was open and vulnerable, not closed and self-sufficient. So here's a difference between what it might look like to live an enchanted versus a disenchanted existence in today's world. So let's say, for instance, that you have a child and the child is sick, has a fever. What do? Do you go to your pastor and ask him to pray over your child, or do you go to a doctor, hopefully a good one? Well, the difference between how we might approach this might be a hint as to whether we live a world of enchantment or disenchantment. So in summary, Taylor is going to say that we live in a world of contested beliefs, and our world is disenchanted. He gives some historical reasons why this disenchantment happened. The first is Reformation. The second is the Enlightenment. In the Reformation, the Protestants saw the world as less sacramental and more symbolic than the Catholic Church. For example, what happens at the Lord's Supper? Well, it depends on who you ask. The Catholics are going to see something pretty magical happening in the Eucharist.
Transubstantiation is the technical term used to designate the unique change of the bread and wine used at Mass into the body and blood of Christ. Transubstantiation indicates that through the consecration of the bread and wine by the hands of a validly ordained priest of the Church, there occurs the change of the entire substance of the bread into the substance of the body of Christ, and of the entire substance of the wine into the substance of the blood of Christ, even though the appearance, texture, color, weight, shape, and taste of the bread and wine remain.
Protestants, on the other hand, are going to say this is just way too weird, and really all that's happening at the Lord's Supper is just symbolic.
The doctrine of transubstantiation claims that a miracle takes place when the priest blesses, as they call them, the elements in the Eucharist. The evidence, however, does not support this contention.
So Taylor, who is a Catholic, says that this change in the way of understanding how the Lord's Supper actually takes place is an example of what happens when the world goes from an enchanted place to a disenchanted place. Here's how Smith explains Taylor's view. If the church no longer has good magic, then all magic must be black. In other words, the Reformers' rejection of sacramentalism is the beginning of naturalism, or at least opens the door to its possibility. And then Taylor's going to say that the Enlightenment also moved us to a disenchanted world, because in the Enlightenment, we started to study nature for its own sake, not as a way of understanding and worshiping God. Another important term in our vocabulary list is exclusive humanism, and this is a worldview that is able to account for meaning and significance without any appeal to the divine or transcendence. So in other words, when man is trying to figure things out, you don't look outward beyond yourself, you look inward, and you don't ask the question why, but you end up asking the question how.
Hold on.
Yes?
What do you mean out of nothing? What do you...
Why is there something instead of why is there nothing? Why does the universe exist at all? Why is there something?
But surely the bigger question is not why, but how. Well, why is irrelevant?
Okay. Because I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me.
The last thing we're going to look at in our vocabulary list is the imminent frame, and this is a constructed social space that frames our lives entirely within a natural rather than supernatural order. And these are different ways of seeing reality around us. Some people are going to say that the natural world is everything that there is, and others are going to be more open and say, well, maybe there is a reality beyond what we see right in front of us. Here's an example.
Okay, quick question, are you a Christian?
I suppose the most straightforward answer to that is yes, although I think it's let's leave it at yes.
Well, I'm a bit dissatisfied with that because there are so many kinds of Christians, and
well,
I would never imagine that you were a very literal-minded Christian.
Well, there are truths other than the literal that perhaps are more truthful than even literal truths. There are many kinds of truth, and I don't mean that in a postmodern way, actually. But the truths that govern behavior and the truths that emerge from facts are not the same truths.
But do you believe that Jesus rose again from the dead?
Well, the first answer would be it depends on what you mean by Jesus.
A historical human being that existed
in a body, and who
in a
came back
body.
in a body, and
Yes.
it was a physical body, and that it was on earth.
Yes, that it was on earth, and that was literally came back to life after death.
I would say that at the moment I'm agnostic about that issue, which is a lot different than saying I don't believe that it happened.
That's very interesting.
One of the things I have come to learn over the last 15 years in particular is that the world is a very, very strange place. It's far stranger than we think. And what we don't understand about consciousness and its relationship with the body would fill many books. And you could say the same thing about our relationship with time, and perhaps corporality and vulnerability and death for that matter. So I don't understand the structure of being well enough to make my way through the complexities of the resurrection story. I would say it's the most mysterious element of the biblical stories to me, and perhaps I'm not alone in that. I mean, it's the central drama in the Christian corpus, let's say. But I don't believe that it's reasonable to boil it down to something like, do you believe that or do you not believe it? It's not, I don't know the limits of human possibility. I don't know.
That's an intriguing answer, and it surprises me.
So as we think about the difference between enchanted and disenchanted views of the world, one of the questions, how do we know anything? Can something be unthinkable just because it is too weird to be true? Is empirical science the only way of understanding the world around us? And we see that sometimes people don't want to believe things just because they can't understand it.
If you substitute religious philosophy for science, there will be a generation of people who will not understand what science is. And they will be intellectually crippled.
So what does this whole enchanted, disenchanted thing have to do with Christians? Well, as Christians, we say we have met someone who is invisible to everybody else. This invisible friend has changed our lives. So I'm wondering, is that crazy, especially as we think about a movie that was made in 1950 about a big invisible rabbit?
How did you happen to call him Harvey?
Well, Harvey's his name.
How do you know that?
Well, there was a rather interesting coincidence on that, Doctor. One night several years ago, I was walking early in the evening down along Fairfax Street. Well, anyway, I was walking down along the street, and I heard this voice saying, "Good evening, Mr. Dowd." Well, I turned around, and here was this big 6-foot rabbit leaning up against a lamppost. I thought nothing of that, because when you've lived in a town as long as I've lived in this one, you get used to the fact that everybody knows your name.
So here's the question. Could Harvey be real? Why or why not? And how does your disenchanted or enchanted view speak to this?
Now, where is Elwood? Elwood, we've been waiting for you.
Oh, sorry, baby.
We've lost the car. The judge took it. We'll have to go down to the corner and wait for a bus. Hurry up, dear.
Good night, Mr. Shummelpotzer.
Good night.
Was anything the matter? No, I thought you decided to stay with Dr. Chumley. Huh? Well, thank you, Harvey. I prefer you, too.